How could they do something so stupid? What were they thinking? Why didn't they just follow the rules? How could they do this again? If you're asking any of these questions, the answer is almost always because it made sense to them at the time. So what can we do? The solution is to be curious, to try to understand why it made sense to them in that moment. Because if it made sense to them in that moment, it may well make sense again in the future, and it may well make sense to someone else. And therefore, the chances are it will happen again. Being curious opens us up to possibilities. Was there information that they didn't have that they should have had? Were they juggling between two competing priorities? Had they been given implied or informal instructions that departed from normal procedures? Had they been working a 14-hour shift when they're affected by fatigue, stress, and overwork? Being curious enables us to identify where the barriers are to our staff performing at their best and fixing them. Now, sometimes disciplinary processes might be appropriate, but if we jump straight into that space without understanding why it made sense at the time, we're likely to be ineffectually treating symptoms rather than underlying causes and promoting future prevention. Now, you might be thinking, yeah, but Tony, some of my staff, they do some really stupid stuff for no reason. Well, let me give you an extreme example. When I was working as a lawyer, I once visited a new client in the courthouse cells on a Monday afternoon. He'd been arrested on the Friday evening, charged with a series of assaults. And the attacks basically involved him approaching several people one after another and asking them, did they have drugs? And if they said no, punching them repeatedly in the head and putting one of them in hospital. So, nasty stuff. He'd been refused bail and been held in custody over the weekend to appear before the magistrate on Monday. Now, I spoke to my client and he was adamant that he wanted to plead guilty to all the charges immediately when we went into court that afternoon. He believed that because he had spent the weekend in custody, the magistrate would release him with time served. Now, I knew that given his extensive criminal history and the number of charges, that was just never going to happen. He was looking at a lot more than just a few days imprisonment. But when I tried to explain the situation to him, I may as well have been speaking to him in Martian. Does not compute. He was absolutely fixated on the idea that he would be released, and I had grave concerns for his mental state and whether he was fit to properly understand what was happening. He needed to be psychiatrically assessed. It was also very clear that, among other things, he was suffering from withdrawal. His drug-addicted body was screaming to be released so that he would get his next hit. He believed he had found a way to do that, and therefore nothing else mattered. In that moment, to him, that was his biggest and most immediate need. And so, even in that highly agitated and disturbed state, by demanding to immediately plead guilty, he was doing what made sense to him at the time. Now, it's an extreme example, but it's a useful reminder that people are nearly always doing what makes sense to them at the time. And being curious to understand why that made sense to them is critical for effective leadership.